Hey, what's up, and welcome to QnA, the show where you have questions and I try to answer them to the best of my ability. A lot of questions after a questionable loss by the Cleveland Browns. So let's just get into them. Jordan with the first question today says, I'm sure it's already been asked, but could bringing in Sue really give a great defensive line? I think he meant a great boost to the defensive line. But nonetheless, I think we all kind of jump to signing NDAMUKONG Suh in these situations because he's the biggest name available. But trying to get NDAMUKONG Suh is a bit more complicated. I think people are making it out to be. One, NDAMUKONG Suh is a veteran player who has made a ton of money in the NFL. Why do I bring that up? Is because when you get players in those situations, they're not necessarily desperate to play, right? Which means they're just not going to play anywhere. If you go back and listen to Joe Hayden's interview he recently had with Rich Eisen, where they're talking about where he would have played or where he wanted to, Joe Hayden said he had two places in a specific dollar amount and a specific role that he wanted. If not, he's just not going to play. That's how most veteran players that are at the point of their career that NDAMUKONG Suh is kind of thinks, right? He's a former NFL superstar. So the idea that we can just throw the minimum or throw some money at NDAMUKONG Suh and he's just going to play for the Browns, I think is far-fetched. In reality, NDAMUKONG probably has a role that he desires, that he won't come back for anything less, a dollar amount that he desires, that he won't come back and play for anything less, in a place, a location, a couple of locations he desires that he would rather go to. Anything that doesn't fit that criteria, he just don't got to do it, right? And NDAMUKONG Suh does not have to play football anymore. He's not in that situation. He has made enough money. So we keep bringing up NDAMUKONG Suh like this is Madden and we can just go on the free agency tab and sign him. The question is more about, does NDAMUKONG Suh even want to play for the Cleveland Browns? Does he want to do what the Browns' role would be for him? The answer is probably no. I don't think it's realistic to bring in NDAMUKONG Suh because I don't think people are looking at this from the perspective of NDAMUKONG Suh really don't got to play this year if he don't want to. Right? Maybe he feels like, hey, I'll wait till the end of the year, see if Tampa Bay wants me back. He might just be like that. Not everybody wants to, and you have to also keep in mind, when we're talking about somebody in the position that NDAMUKONG Suh is in his career, he does not want to go to a city he's never been in before. Right? Maybe if this were somewhere he had been before, he would be more open to it. But a player at that age of his career, I believe he has a family, kids. You have to make it worthwhile for him to want to join your team. And I don't think the Browns are making it worthwhile to him. So I just don't think bringing in NDAMUKONG Suh is a great solution. One, because it's not as simple as just offering him a contract. Two, there's a real question of if NDAMUKONG Suh is good anymore because he wasn't last year. There's a reason why he's still available. But again, I understand why everybody goes to NDAMUKONG Suh in this situation. It's just like, I don't think we're fully evaluating whether that's a realistic situation. Ashton says, what do you think our record is going forward after losing 2 games in the fourth quarter to teams we should have or could have beaten? What do you think this would be like going forward when Deshaun comes back? Well, I mean, that's why you trade for Deshaun, because he's a fourth quarter game ender, right? Like that's what he does. He ends games in the fourth quarter in a positive direction for you. So that's what it's probably going to look like more often than not, because Deshaun is a closer. But yeah, after losing these 2 games, I mean, you're 500. The reality is that you want to be at 500 before Deshaun gets there. And since you can't go 511 games, well, you can if you tie one. but you want it to be around 5 to 6 wins. Still on the table, but the more games you lose, obviously, the more difficult that becomes to achieve. But you got to just play what's ahead of you. We can't play the schedule game also. Like, I think we got caught up into this schedule game, and that's not a game that the Browns can afford to play or the fans because, again, 1 week at a time. We can't worry about how good another team is or what the schedule looks like it's going to be. 1 week at a time. Be where your feet are. Play what's in front of you. It's really that simple. If we get caught up in, this opponent in week 9 and this one, be where your feet are. Play what's in front of you. That's it. Next question comes from Josh, who says, Q, what do you think bringing in someone like Sheldon Richardson could be helpful for the defensive line rotation, if nothing else, to provide good depth? I think Sheldon Richardson's more likely. I don't know if he's completely available. I have to double check. But I think a pickup like Sheldon Richardson is more likely, right? Because he's been in this system before. He's been in this city before, so this is not like a new situation to him. Nothing's new here, right? And he's not of the status of veteran player to where he doesn't really, if he doesn't feel the need to play football, there's really no reason for him to, right? He's made enough money. He probably won't have to work, like a serious job again. But, he's not NDAMUKONG. He didn't make $100 million in his career, is basically my point. But yeah, with Sheldon, I think Sheldon I wouldn't describe him as a run stuffer. He's never been that. But it's always been a big knock on him, actually. But I think any depth is good depth right now. If you're talking about what the Browns can try to bring in to help what is a bad defensive line or defensive interior. The next question comes from Matt Milner, who says, hey, Q, what are your thoughts on the aggressive nature of Stefanski on 4th down? I don't mind it personally because honestly playing scared in the NFL gets you nowhere, but I can understand why sometimes execution could be better, especially on 4th and 3. The first drive, just wanted to ask. Thanks. Here's the thing. When you have an aggressive mindset as a coach, everybody will point out when you go for it on 4th and 3 and you miss out on points, they will bring up the points. You know what nobody ever does after a win? Is bring up the times you went for it on 4th and 3 and it actually worked out, right? And I think that's what he talks about not being results-based, is that everybody freaks out when you go for it on 4th and 3. Don't get it, even if it might be 40% of the time that happens, or 20% of the time. Everybody freaks out, acts like that's the reason you lost the game. Nobody ever gives you credit for winning the game when you do it, and you did, right? And there were plenty of times last week where it did win them the game. So I don't mind it. I'd rather have a coach go down swinging than a coach go down kicking, right? If I got to choose between those two extremes, I'd rather have the aggressive coach, right? I've seen Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin blow 2 games versus the Browns because they just want to punt for no reason. I've seen that in Denver where they're kicking field goals. Like, you play to win the game. You play to be aggressive. I'd rather go down playing football than kicking, right? I'd rather play football. And that's how I would rather a coach be. I understand it's frustrating. I know there's a lot of people who always want to keep the points or whatever it is. And that comes from decades of this offense being putrid, quite frankly, right? I mean, we're talking about the Eric Mangini days and even worse, Brandon Whedon, where points were at a premium. They're not necessarily that this year or in the Kevin Stefanski era period. So they're a little bit more aggressive with these decisions. And that's not changing, and I don't mind it. I understand it's not going to be a popular choice every week, but I'd rather have mistakes in that direction than be field goal kicking team, right? Be ultra passive field goal kicking team, because as much as we like to say prevent you from winning, when we talk about the defense not being aggressive, on the offensive side of the ball, a similar principle applies, right? Field goals don't win you football games as often as points touchdowns do. And sometimes you got to sacrifice some field goals to get a chance to get a touchdown. I don't mind it at all. Ian says, hey, Q, we've seen mediocre Brown seasons in the past. This seems to have people especially riled up and aggravated. We say this every year. We really say this every year. I think what happens is during the 6 months in between February and August, we forget how riled up people get over football. We really do. Like during that 6 months, we forget how insane people get over football. And then once those 6 months are up, we see it and we're like, oh my God, this is crazy because we forgot. But this happens all the time. That being said, this year could be a little bit different because we got the remnants of Baker Wars over here, and maybe that got people more entrenched into I watch the Browns kind of on a hate watch basis. There's definitely more people hate watching the Browns, right? People who said they weren't fans of the team that still watch the team just to try to troll the team, which I don't ever understand hating on that level, but I guess. But yeah, maybe that's adding to it. But I mean, like every year we think this is like the most incredibly outrageous fans have gotten. And then, we go away for 6 months and then come back and we're like, oh man, people are still crazy. It just is what it is. Chris with a question says, hey Q, fans have been complaining about Nick Chubb not being in the game on the final drive. What are your thoughts on this? I don't want to say anything that's like not praising Nick Chubb just because I think he's been incredible this year. But the reality is he's not a good third down running back. He's not he's not a better pass protector than Kareem Hunt, and he's not a better route runner than Kareem Hunt, and he's not better with as a receiver as Kareem Hunt. He should not be out there in 2-minute situations. If we're in a 5-minute situation, Nick Chubb should absolutely be out there. In 2-minute situations where you can't really run design runs, you don't have any timeouts, and you're down, Nick Chubb doesn't have as much as a purpose out there. Because where Nick Chubb is great is as a runner going downhill on outside zone. You can't run those plays. So if you can't run the plays where Nick Chubb is great at, you have to start trying to figure out ways to get him the ball. And sometimes that could be more convoluted than it needs to be. And sometimes it's just easier to hit Kareem Hunt on an angle route. So I get why if people are casually watching the Browns and going, hey, why isn't the best player on the field, why that take can happen. But if you've been paying attention, Kareem Hunt's the third down back, and the third down back's just going to be in the game when it's the 2-minute drill. And Kareem Hunt's the third down back because he's a superior third down back than Nick Chubb. Like that's kind of just it, right? If you watch the Titans in those situations where they're down with like a minute left, no timeouts, Derrick Henry ain't in the game either because he's not third down back. That's just is what it is. People won't understand it if they're just kind of watching it casually, which is fine. But if you've been paying attention to this team for long enough, you know that that's why he wasn't in the game. Just Chill says, hey, is Joe Woods the problem or is it personnel? If we're talking about this week, I don't think Joe Woods was the problem. If we're talking about week 2, Joe Woods was the problem because the miscommunication is somewhat on Joe Woods, right? The reason that they can't run cover 3 after 3 years is on Joe Woods. But the secondary wasn't an issue. Marcus Mariota completed 7 passes. The secondary was not the problem. It was the front 7 this week. Jacob Phillips was all over the place, never where he was supposed to be. I don't want to say freelance because that word's loaded, but I think he saw things. I think Jacob Phillips saw a ghost back there at middle linebacker and was shooting gaps he had no business shooting. Same thing with JOK a little bit. JOK was shooting some gaps that he really shouldn't have been shooting. And then, when you have guys playing on your defensive line who look like exactly who they are, I can't be mad at him, but that's part of the problem, right? Isaac Rochelle, my bad. He looked like a guy who got cut from the team at the end of the year. At the end of camp, my bad. And he played like it. Who else? Tommy Togiai, pretty consistent with what he's produced. Jordan Elliott, I thought he was all right, but on the scale of what we saw, which was not great. And Isaiah Thomas looked fine at times. Other times he looked like a 7th-round rookie. Alex Wright looked fine at times. Other times he looked like a rookie. We found out last week, well, yesterday, how important the presence of Clowney and Miles are. Because the presence of those two makes the issues that you have with the others minimal. But when they ain't out there, this defensive line is in hell. I've said this all summer. I'm not shocked that it turned out to be true. That just is what it is. We could blame Joe Woods all you want, but if you can't win one-on-one blocking, like matchup, like if you can't win one-on-ones, scheme don't matter, right? And it wasn't scheme that was getting you gashed. They tried everything scheme-wise to stop him from getting gashed. People kept shooting the wrong gaps. People didn't have eye discipline. That's a personnel problem. I know there is a comforting instinct whenever we see something go wrong to go fire the coach or blame it on the coach. Because whether we're thinking about it consciously or not, we know that firing a coach to us seems like a simpler solution than the players aren't good. Because if the players aren't good, there's not much you can do. There's only so many players you can get at this point in the year. But what happened last week, well, on Sunday, was one of them situations where the players just aren't good. That doesn't mean that Joe Woods is exempt from criticism. This just ain't the week for the criticism. Because the secondary, they was all right. The one blown coverage, again, happened because of a linebacker in the defensive end blew their lane. So I don't think this is the Joe Woods week to be mad at Joe Woods. There will be other weeks. The Chargers might be that week, but this ain't the week. And I'll give Joe Woods credit when he deserves it. I will point the finger at Joe Woods when he deserves it. Sometimes it's going to line up with what the majority of Browns fans think. Sometimes it won't. Same thing with Kevin. This week I put it on Kevin. Week 2 I put it on Joe. You know, I'm not afraid to point the finger at any of those guys. But if it's Joe Woods this week, if it wasn't Joe Woods this week, it wasn't Joe Woods. I can't lie to you and tell you that just because it'll make people feel better and maybe the view count goes up. But, you know, it wasn't Joe Woods. Joe Woods wasn't the problem this week. It was the personnel, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion. But that's it for this week's Q&A. Y'all have a great day. Have a great night.